H-E-R, read from a prepared page. Voice flat. Eyes trained on the margin. I was told my compensation no longer aligned with current market realities. Then Roger Bliss leaned back in his chair, arms folded, posture relaxed in the way people get when they know they're untouchable. As head of cost optimization, Roger spoke like every human decision could be reduced to a column in a spreadsheet. $38,000 for this role is no longer reasonable, he said, smiling professionally, not apologetic, not angry, just efficient. I sat there absorbing the words, heat rushing to my face while the room pretended nothing obscene had just happened. I haven't been able to calm down. Even as I write these lines, my heart is still racing and my hands are ice cold because of the freezing weather. I wonder how it is where you are. What's the temperature right now? And if you're still sitting here listening to me, please leave me your lucky number to warm my heart a little. I wasn't a junior analyst or a replaceable temp. I was the senior manager responsible for data compliance across 3 divisions, the person who designed the reporting logic that kept regulators satisfied and lawsuits theoretical. I built the guardrails that allowed executives like Roger to sleep at night. He never looked at me when HR slid the termination notice across the table. To Roger, this wasn't a firing, it was cost correction. The humiliation came quietly. No raised voices, no dramatics, just the understanding that years of precision, caution, and unpaid overtime had been summarized as an expense worth cutting before lunch. My badge would be deactivated immediately, access revoked, role eliminated effective today. I stood up because sitting any longer felt like agreement. They thought they had deleted a line item. They hadn't realized the systems were still running on my name, quietly enforcing rules no one else fully understood. Even now, without supervision or replacement anywhere inside daily operations, systems continuously operating silently unseen, always today. What you just heard was the emotional truth. The rest will contain some fictional elements and use AI to clarify the lesson and the underlying emotions. Hopefully this resonates with you. If not, please allow yourself to rest early. I didn't become valuable by being loud. I became valuable by making sure nothing ever exploded in public for years. My job was to sit between company and consequences, reading regulations no one else bothered to open, translating risk into procedures executives could tolerate. I remembered nights spent rewriting data flows so audit trails aligned, weekends answering compliance questions before regulators could ask them, mornings fixing problems quietly before they turned into headlines. When reviews came, they always left satisfied. When lawsuits threatened, they dissolved before filing. Silence was reward for doing it right. Then Roger Bliss arrived with shoes and polished language. As head of cost optimization, he talked about lean structures and streamlined workflows as if caution itself were inefficiency. In meetings, he praised the foundation already in place, while suggesting it could be simplified, cheaper, faster, lighter. He never asked why audits were clean. He assumed they were clean because company was disciplined and modern. He never traced that discipline back to a system designed to absorb regulatory pressure before it cracked. To him, compliance was passive, automatic, something that just happened if you removed friction. That was insult I swallowed. Not the firing, not the paycheck. It was watching Roger accept credit for stability he didn't understand, while treating the work behind it as unnecessary weight. I knew truth he didn't. Company hadn't avoided penalties by luck. It had avoided them because someone had been standing in front of the storm for years alone, silently waiting. I learned about Roger Bliss's changes the same way most disasters begin, through praise. An email circulated celebrating efficiency gains, highlighting how several compliance layers had been removed to accelerate decision-making. Roger framed it as courage. I recognized it as arrogance dressed in confidence. He said it plainly in a meeting I was no longer invited to lead. "We don't need this much verification," he told the room. "Compliance slows growth. Streamline it." The words traveled fast, because they were exactly what executives wanted to hear. Less friction, fewer controls, faster numbers. On paper. It worked. Dashboards stayed green, reports closed on time. The absence of alarms was mistaken for health. Roger smiled in town halls, pointing at charts that showed stability without understanding why stability had existed in the first place. He believed systems behaved because they were obedient, not because they were restrained. What amused me, in a cold, distant way, was how predictable it all was. He removed redundancy without realizing redundancy was the system. He eliminated manual sign-offs without noticing those signatures were legal anchors. He trusted automated summaries while ignoring the assumptions buried beneath them. It wasn't sabotage. It was simplification without comprehension. I watched quietly from the outside as confidence grew. Emails became shorter. Reviews became celebratory. Roger started talking about scaling his model company-wide, about how legacy thinking had been holding growth hostage. No one asked the boring questions anymore. No one checked the edges. Then the notification arrived. Not dramatic. Not urgent. Just a line in a shared calendar, federal audit. Random selection. Standard scope. The kind that appears when no one expects trouble. The kind that doesn't care about optimism or slides. That was the moment the irony settled in. The reports would still look perfect tomorrow. The dashboards would remain calm. But the system Roger had simplified was about to be examined by people who understood consequences. And for the first time, compliance was no longer slowing growth. It was about to stop everything. The collapse was already scheduled, quietly approved, and waiting for signatures nobody remembered removing yet. The first crack appeared quietly, disguised as a routine question from legal. I heard about it through a forwarded message that was never meant to reach me. Can someone confirm why these records don't have full verification? That single sentence carried more weight than any presentation Roger Bliss had ever given. At first, they treated it like a formatting issue. Missing fields, inconsistent timestamps, nothing alarming, just inconvenient. Meetings multiplied, emails stacked. The tension didn't explode, it tightened. I could feel it from the outside, the way an organization stiffens when it senses danger, but hasn't named it yet. Roger reacted the way insecure people always do. He spoke faster, he pointed backward. "This is legacy architecture," he said in a closed meeting. "According to someone who was there, Nova built it this way. We're still cleaning up inherited complexity." My name became a shield he hid behind. Convenient, familiar. Legal didn't argue with him. They didn't need to. They kept pulling threads. Each answer produced another question. Each explanation exposed a gap that had never mattered before, because I had been there, watching it daily. Without that oversight, assumptions started to show. I imagined Roger pacing, assuring everyone it was manageable. "These are edge cases," he said. "Nothing systemic. But systems don't fail all at once. They reveal themselves in fragments. A missing signature here, an untraceable approval there. Enough to make attorneys stop using email and start using conference rooms." Then came the phrase no executive wants to hear expanded scope. What began as a targeted review widened. Legally and automatically, 3 years of historical data. Every archived report, every compliance decision logged, altered, or bypassed. No exceptions. That was when the tension turned physical. Deadlines stopped being discussed. Blame stopped being subtle. Roger's confidence hardened into something brittle. The system he claimed to understand was no longer being judged by internal optimism, but by external law. And law doesn't care who built the slides. For the first time, silence stopped protecting them, and every shortcut taken in confidence began demanding its price. Methodically, without emotion, from now. I was making coffee when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number cutting cleanly through the morning. I almost ignored it. Almost. Something in the timing felt deliberate, like a door opening exactly when you stop pushing. The voice on the other end didn't introduce itself right away. Calm. Precise. "Corporate, we've been following your work for a long time," he said. No flattery, no urgency. Then the single question landed. Measured and surgical. Do you still keep your full compliance mindset? I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was accurate. Compliance isn't a checklist. It's a way of thinking, a habit of anticipating failure before it arrives. I told him yes, I always had. He acknowledged it with a quiet pause. Then he explained why he was calling. Their analysts had noticed irregularities in my former company's reporting patterns. Subtle ones. Gaps where confirmations used to live. Approvals that ended abruptly, like something had been erased rather than resolved. What struck me wasn't the concern, it was the precision. He named the layers Roger Bliss had removed, the verification loops he'd disabled, the archival checks he'd deemed unnecessary. He spoke about them the way surgeons talk about incisions. Clean, informed, unemotional. We know exactly what he deleted, the man said. And we know why it mattered. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend myself. I didn't offer context. That wasn't my role anymore. My calm came from distance, from watching consequences unfold without needing to guide them. The call ended as neatly as it began. No promises, no numbers yet, just interest, backed by understanding. I set the phone down and took a sip of coffee that had gone cold while I listened. For the first time since being erased from that conference room, I felt something close to balance. Roger was still busy simplifying systems. Somewhere else, people were mapping the damage accurately. And for once, I wasn't ahead of the storm. I was watching it form. Quietly, that knowledge settled in my chest, heavy and steady, as the future rearranged itself without my involvement anymore. If you believe staying calm, saying nothing, and letting facts not emotions do the work was the right move here. Leave any number in the comments below. Your voice deserves to be seen and carried forward. I didn't feel triumphant when the offer arrived. I felt light. The way you do when a weight you didn't know you were carrying finally lifts. The number was clear: $162,000 a year. Full authority over compliance architecture. Direct reporting lines. No approval theater. More important than money was the sentence that followed. I would control the system, not negotiate with it. They didn't ask for favors. They didn't ask what I knew about my former employer. They already knew enough. Their legal team had mapped the regulatory exposure themselves, traced missing verifications, reconstructed deletions Roger Bliss had dismissed as harmless. The law had documented everything without my involvement. I read the contract slowly, not because it was complex, but because it was respectful. Boundaries were defined. Responsibilities were explicit. Compliance wasn't framed as friction, it was framed as protection. Growth would happen, but not by erasing safeguards and hoping nothing broke. I accepted without celebration. No speech, no revenge fantasies. Just a signature and a calm understanding that I would never again have to explain why caution mattered. I wasn't being hired to look cheaper. I was being hired to keep consequences away. The relief came later, quietly, knowing that no one would ask me to streamline what kept them safe, knowing no executive would smile while cutting a control they didn't understand, knowing I wouldn't need to warn anyone about storms they refused to see. The irony settled gently. Roger had believed power came from deleting oversight. He never noticed oversight documents deletion itself. I didn't need to expose him. I didn't need to testify. I simply stepped into a role where competence was valued, while the system he weakened spoke for itself. Freedom isn't loud. Sometimes it arrives as permission to do your job correctly, without apology, without fear, and without needing to prove anything to anyone ever again. That certainty gave me space to breathe, to plan carefully, and to build systems that would never require silence to stay compliant again for people who respected boundaries and understood accountability from leadership. I could feel the panic before anyone admitted it. It leaked through forwarded emails, clipped phone calls, and calendar invites marked urgent without explanation. Roger Bliss was suddenly everywhere, booking emergency meetings, hiring consultants who spoke fast and charged by the hour, flooding inboxes with reassurance he no longer believed himself. From what I heard, the consultants asked the wrong questions. They focused on presentation gaps, not structural ones. Roger nodded along, desperate for confirmation that this was manageable, temporary, fixable. At night, his emails grew longer, midnight messages promising progress, early morning follow-ups demanding updates. Control was slipping, and everyone could see it. The damage meter kept running. Each hour the audit stayed unresolved meant delayed filings, frozen approvals, stalled deals, numbers accumulated quietly, the way serious losses always do. Roger tried to outwork the problem, thinking effort could substitute for understanding. He rewrote procedures he had already broken, stacking temporary fixes on permanent gaps. I stayed silent, not strategically. Naturally, this phase never required my voice. Panic creates noise, and noise accelerates mistakes. I knew the system well enough to recognize the pattern. When people stop asking what failed and start asking who to blame, the collapse is already in motion. The turning point didn't arrive with shouting, it arrived with documentation. During a review session, auditors traced the final compliant record backward. They followed approval chains, verification timestamps, and digital signatures with methodical patience. There was no drama, just consistency. The last intact compliance signature didn't belong to Roger. It didn't belong to legal. It belonged to me. My name appeared in the audit summary without commentary, sitting alone where continuity should have been. The implication was obvious. Everything after my departure lacked lawful completion. That was when Roger lost the room. Explanations stopped working. Consultants stopped speaking. Questions changed tone. This was no longer about efficiency or optimization. It was about responsibility. I wasn't present to watch it happen, but I could picture it clearly. Panic collapsing into realization. Control giving way to arithmetic. The system hadn't failed mysteriously. It had simply recorded the moment. I watched the collapse from a distance, the way you watch a structure fail when every load-bearing assumption has been removed. What people didn't understand was that nothing dramatic had to break. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do when no one knew how to guide it. Without me, no one knew where to sign, which exception mattered, or who carried final responsibility. Legal waited on operations. Operations waited on finance. Finance waited on Roger Bliss, who suddenly stopped replying in writing. Meetings ended without decisions. Decisions ended without owners. The chain reaction spread quietly. Reports stalled because approvals were incomplete. Approvals stalled because authority was unclear. Authority was unclear because Roger had optimized titles without understanding accountability. Every shortcut he celebrated became a dead end when consequences demanded a name. Board members began asking direct questions. Simple ones. Who owns this control? Who certifies this process? Roger answered with slides instead of answers. He delegated instead of deciding. When pressed, he deferred. When cornered, he disappeared. I heard he started missing meetings, that he sent deputies instead, that his calendar filled with placeholders labeled external calls. Avoidance replaced confidence. Silence replaced authority. The system responded the only way systems do when leadership evaporates. It froze. Then the language changed. Phrases like operational issue and temporary disruption vanished. In their place came legal terms, personal exposure, fiduciary duty, individual accountability, words that don't dilute when repeated. The auditors didn't raise their voices. They didn't threaten. They documented. And once documentation pointed to intentional removals, the question was no longer what failed, but who authorized it. That was the trigger. A formal review into personal responsibility. Not departmental, not systemic, individual. The collapse completed itself then. Roger's absence became evidence. His decisions became records. And the system, finally understood by no one inside it, finished explaining itself to people who only cared about responsibility. It was not chaos, but consequence, unfolding exactly as designed. Methodical, impartial, inevitable, leaving no room for excuses. Spin, or escape once accountability became unavoidable for everyone involved at the top level. If you think Roger's choices avoiding responsibility And cutting corners he never understood deserved exactly this outcome. Leave a single dot in the comments below. I wasn't in the room when the board finally stopped debating and started calculating, but I know exactly how it unfolded. Numbers have a way of stripping emotion from power. And that morning, emotion was no longer welcome. They laid the figures side by side. Nova Wells. Annual compensation $38,000. Audit exposure created after my removal several million and climbing. No adjectives, no commentary, just arithmetic. The room went quiet, not out of shock, but recognition. For the first time, my salary wasn't discussed as a cost. It was presented as context, a baseline, proof of how cheap prevention had been compared to the price of arrogance. Every shortcut Roger Bliss had defended now carried a dollar value attached to it. I was told Roger tried to explain. He spoke about intent, about efficiency, about acting in good faith. The board didn't interrupt him. They didn't argue. They let him finish. Then asked a single question. Who authorized the removal of verified controls? That question didn't need an answer. The documentation already had one. Roger Bliss was suspended effective immediately. Access revoked. Authority paused. Not fired yet. That word still required paperwork. But the message was clear. Confidence had expired. The coldest part came afterward. During the audit summary, a new section appeared. Individual risk attribution. Names listed not by title, but by decision. There, in neutral font, was Roger Bliss? Not as a manager, not as a visionary, as a liability. My name appeared elsewhere in the same report. Historical reference. Last verified compliance signature. A contrast no one needed explained. Justice didn't arrive with drama or speeches. It arrived as comparison, as alignment between cause and cost. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. They had tried to save money by erasing a person. Instead, they learned how expensive ignorance could be. When written clearly, line by line, without mercy, that realization settled permanently, reminding everyone involved that numbers remember decisions long after people leave rooms, and that cutting the wrong line item can expose far more than budgets ever reveal to the world outside. I didn't look back after everything settled. There was nothing left to prove. No victory lap to take. No satisfaction in watching someone fall. I moved forward instead, into work that respected precision, patience, and responsibility. My days became quieter. Decisions were made carefully. Systems were built to last, not impress. What surprised me was how calm justice felt when it finally arrived. No shouting, no celebration, just alignment. Effort matched value. Authority matched accountability. I was paid what my work was worth, and trusted to protect what mattered without interference. I didn't need revenge because I didn't lose anything worth reclaiming. The past closed itself, neatly, without my help. They thought I was too expensive, but they never calculated the cost of arrogance, the price of shortcuts, or the bill that ignorance always sends eventually. That lesson stayed with me, steady and permanent. As I built forward in peace, I learned the most important lesson from this story, not from watching a system collapse, but from watching a person keep their dignity while being treated like a number. The practical value is clear. The things that quietly protect an organization are rarely noticed until they're gone. The emotional value lies in restraint, not silence born from fear, but silence chosen because truth doesn't need shouting to be heard. And the human value, perhaps the deepest one, is refusing to let injustice turn you into someone bitter or small. I didn't choose revenge. I chose to do my work properly, in a place that respected it. But that choice raises a hard ethical question if you were in the same situation. Would you speak up immediately to win? Or would you step back and allow the system to reveal its own mistakes? Would you protect your ego? Or protect the principles that many other people rely on every single day? If you're still listening right now, I'd love to know where you're listening from. No matter the place, these quiet struggles tend to look more alike than we think. And if this story resonated with you, please help it reach someone else who might need it. One subscription helps this story travel further. A like or a share could help someone who feels overlooked realize they're not invisible. You're not just watching a video, you're standing on the side of what's right. And sometimes, that simple act is enough to change the way someone sees their own worth. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.